Hey guys, Matthew here. In today's video, we're going to be going over one of my starters for the upcoming 3.17 Siege of the Atlas and Archnemesis League, and that is going to be the return of General Cry Blade Flurry Berserker. Now, this is a build that I played extensively in the Scourge League, and I had an absolute blast with it, as it's one of these builds which has a really high ceiling. You could easily throw in hundreds and hundreds of exalts into this build, and it's just going to keep scaling and scaling and scaling. Now, the downside of that, however, is that compared to something like a miner or a trapper build, it takes a little bit more currency to get off the ground to really start pumping heavy damage numbers. But as soon as you get the holy grail for this build, which is the Paradoxica, you are going to be walking over content. Until you get that, you'll probably be able to do just about everything on a couple exalt budget, all the way up to Maven, Cyrus, Uber Elder, no problem. It really is just the feared and the hidden invitations, which are a little bit too hard on that sort of budget, but anything else in the game is fair game. Okay, let's talk real quick about the changes to this build since the last league. The upside is that we haven't really gotten nerfed in any way. They haven't really changed anything about this build whatsoever. The skill gems are the same, the supports are the same, everything really stayed the same. There is one difference, and that is Assassin's Mark. Now, we used to trigger Assassin's Mark on a ring and have that automated. Unfortunately, in the upcoming league, this is no longer going to be possible, and we do not have the sockets to use the new support to automate that to automate the Assassin's Mark. So we will need to manually apply it. Now, this is not that big of a deal, and Assassin's Mark is no longer gonna have a duration. It will be a permanent uptime. So you'll just have to put it down once. But it is still annoying due to the fact that this build already has quite a few buttons that you need to be pressing in order to maximize your damage and your clear and even your survivability. And there's a lot of things that you need to micromanage, which is why I would say it's probably not a great build for super new players. Definitely a build that will require a little bit more advanced game knowledge and knowing what you're going to be doing, as it's not the easiest thing to league start with. However, if you're looking for a challenge, or if you've done it already, this is still a great build. It wasn't really nerfed in any significant way. Now, one thing that has changed, however, not in terms of the build, but in terms of how I decided to make it, is that I've dumbed it down even more so than before. The budget version has lost the large cluster jewel, as I was told that it was just too expensive to put that on this the physical large cluster on the budget version. So I threw that out of the window, which allowed us to actually get a little bit tankier. It allowed me to fit in determination on the build, which is great for survivability, as this build has notoriously been known to be quite squishy on the low budget. It doesn't really have that issue as you start investing more currency into it, however. Okay, another change is the leveling. One thing that was brought to my attention from my previous build guide on this league starter is that it required too many regrets to actually respec the character from the slammer version to the actual endgame version, which is General Cry. So I remediated to that by changing the leveling to Spectral Helix, something that is all listed in the POB, which you can find in the description. And by leveling with Spectral Helix, we actually end up needing a total of 0 regrets in order to respec from the leveling tree to the endgame tree, which is really nice. The ones that you get for free during the campaign are more than enough. Actually, you'll still even have a few left over by the time that you are respecing to the General Cry version of the build, which is really nice, as you won't have to spend any currency there. And we've cut down the large cluster as well, so less money spent, more money saved. Okay, now let's talk about the gear real quickly. There are a few mandatory pieces to this build, but nothing crazy. One thing is the Ichimonji is pretty much your go-to until you do get the Holy Grail, which is the Paradoxica again. But this is going to hold you up until then. It just so happens to be an extremely cheap weapon, but it's very good for us. It's got a bunch of global accuracy, a percent base, which is massive. It's got a lot of attack speed. It's got effective buffs on you, which is affecting our auras. It's got mana reservation, which allows us to, run that extra determination aura, which is massive. Overall, it is by far the best option that you have on this sort of budget. Abyssus, now this is something that I would highly recommend you take off and just throw on any rare piece, any rare helmet with life and armor, resistance, whatever you need, when you are not in the endgame bossing stage of this build. As you will be taking a lot more damage during your mapping, your regular mapping, and you really don't need that much damage and you really don't want to be dying as much as you will with this on, as it does make you quite significantly squishier since it pairs with the Aspect of Carnage for 10% increased damage taken. Now, another mandatory piece is the Red Blade Banner. Now, to quickly explain what this does is it gives you Warcries of infinite power. If you're not too sure what that means, essentially Warcries are scaled by power in this game, and power will basically make them do more. So for example, Enduring Cry gains 1 endurance charge per 5 power. Now power is determined by the number of enemies around you. They could be alive or dead. So for example, here I would need to get 3 endurance charge from this, I would need to get 15 power. And of course, power is not the same for all enemies. Normal, magic, rare, and unique enemies are treated differently, but we bypass this whole nonsense by going with Red Blade Banner, which gives us Warcries of infinite power, which means no matter the Warcry that we're using, it is always going to be maxed out. This is extremely important for our build, as General Cry, basically the number of General Cries is dependent on the number of power, which is why this shield is absolutely mandatory. Now the rest of our gear, luckily, is just going to be life and resistances. So life and resistance on our amulet. Now a little bit of multiplier goes a long way as well. So this amulet would be a few chaos. We don't need that dexterity. We don't need it to be a turquoise. It's just really life and a bit of multi. Now the non-channeling and the channeling skills are mandatory. So we're going to be rocking 3 of those. 2 non-channeling and 1 channeling mana cost. This is going to allow us to cyclone for free, which is how we proc Desecrate in order to even be able to General Scry in the first place. And then the non-channeling is going to affect all of our debuffs and everything else, including our General Cry, which allows us to reserve as much mana as we do, since 34 mana available is a very small amount, but it's plenty as long as our as we do have, you know, the non-channeling mana cost twice. Otherwise, the rings are just going to be life and resistance on the budget version. So life and resistance. Now this is a ring which has a ton of resistance, but I just throw this on basically every character that I own in standard, as it makes it easy to not have to worry about even looking at resistances. The gloves, life and resistance. The belt is a Raislata, but before you crucify me for showcasing a League Starter with a Raislata on, I'm going to be taking it off for the showcase. The boots are just going to be life, resistance, and a bit of move speed. And the flasks are pretty much some basic stuff. Quicksilver for move speed, diamond for crit, basalt because we are also running a Lion's Roar, so more armor pairs really, really well with the determination. However, Lion's Roar is definitely a flask that I would interchange it for a regular granite at any moment. Realistically, this the knockback is actually kind of annoying. So if you find it annoying as much as I do, you could totally take this off. But the 9% more melee damage does make that annoyance a little bit less annoying, as you know, it does a lot of damage. But that's on you. It's a very cheap flask either way. So this is kind of the setup that we're going to be rocking for the showcase right here. In terms of the tree, there's not a whole lot going on. The jewels are basically just going to be life, a little bit of multi, maybe some attack speed if you can get it. Something like this would be quite good. But what else do I have here? I have another one here, just life and a bit of multi. Attack damage while dual wielding doesn't do anything for us. The attributes was because I needed a little bit of int, and the corrupted blood because you always kind of want to have a corrupted blood jewel. So yeah, nothing really, nothing special here. A little bit fluid motion. This is where we're going to get a lot of our dexterity from, and this is mandatory as the build does require you to have quite a bit of dexterity in order to equip some of the stuff, such as well, actually, Paradoxica requires you to have 220, I believe. But nothing that I have on is too important. I believe Ichimonji is 117. But yeah. So let's get right into the actual showcase, and then we're going to hop into the POB portion of the video. So we're going to be doing a Minnow with Maven on it, of course, Awakener level 8, and this is going to be with Guardian's Aid. So some pretty endgame content. Now, I will say as a disclaimer, I don't expect to not die. There's a good chance that I die. This is some pretty endgame content for a build which scales off of melee, right? So yeah, especially by removing the Raislata, my damage just got cut down by roughly 25%. So on this sort of budget, you definitely should not be expecting to do these sort of maps, this sort of content, especially deathless and especially very quickly. But let's go ahead and run the map. So we're going to Cyclone to proc Desecrate, hold down General Cry. So it's a 2-button build. You could easily put your General Cry on your mouse if you wanted to on left mouse click. And then once we get to the boss, we're going to worry about the rest of the stuff. So let's go ahead and proc our Blood Rage, and then we can just kind of start clearing the map. Put down, we're just basically spinning, proccing General Cry, using our flasks whenever they're up. And yeah, now it is not the best clear skill in the game, and I wouldn't argue that it is. However, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. And one thing that I will say is that once you get a little bit more currency into this build, and you get Ascendancy's Gentle Touch for explosions, it is not only a great offensive layer, it's also a great defensive layer, and it's going to take your map clear to the next level. So I highly, highly recommend you make it a priority after the Paradoxica, that being the absolute holy grail weapon for this build. It is going to allow you to do all the content in the game, feared, hidden, anything really. You take the exact gear that I have, right? The exact items that I have, which are just life and resistance, so you throw on a Paradoxica and you are going to be feared viable. It more than doubles your damage. That's how crazy that weapon is. And it doesn't even need to be a good one. It can be a pretty mediocre one, and you'll still be able to walk over the entirety of the game. So as you can see, it's pretty, okay when it comes to the clear. It's not the greatest. Now I'm going to go ahead and put down a portal just in case, some sketchy stuff happens. But when it comes to the single target for this build, we're going to walk up to the boss, put down our Assassin's Mark, put down our 2 totems. Now this is super important because it's going to help us break the attack speed breakpoints that we need to achieve. I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the POB. But then after that, it's just going to be the same old Cyclone through the boss in order to proc our our Frenzy charges from Sword Mastery, and then General Cry in order to deal damage. So let's go ahead and proc our Blood Rage, walk up to the boss. We're going to let him burrow. We should be able to do just that. Put down our totems, and then our damage should kind of ramp up. This build does have ramp up damage, so it's not going to absolutely one-shot a boss. But as you can see, it definitely deals some pretty serious damage, even on the shoestring budget that I'm working with right now. Alright, so make sure to always keep up uptime on our debuff. Now, this is a bit of an annoying arena. Never a big fan of Minotaur, but this is why I showcase it, because it's one of the harder bosses, in my opinion. So again, we put down our curse. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and sit inside the Falling Rocks just to showcase the sort of survivability this build has. It's not as, squishy as some people make it out to be. You are definitely able to face tank some stuff, as long as, you're not being too crazy about it. Let's go ahead and just sit right on top of this guy. Unfortunately, he ran away from us. So let's go ahead and wait for him to show up again. Where is he? Where is he? Oh, there he is. Curse. Put down our totems, and then just kind of spin on top of him, and he is just going to melt when this thing ramps up, and there it is. Oh, no, that's so unfortunate. I thought he would die, but looks like there it is. It was indeed for me, as we have died. So, one of the main problems with this build is that it doesn't have evasion, therefore anything that hits you will hit you, right? It does have a fair bit of armor, especially with our flasks up, but it doesn't have evasion, and the other thing that it doesn't have is any sort of spell suppression, which are definitely 2 very meta defensive layers currently in the game. But again, once you get your Paradoxica, you're going to kill things so fast that you're really not going to have to worry about them killing you. So again, let's finish this up. I'm not going to use anything else, and there it is. Very unfortunate that we had to die there, but it is what it is. Okay, so this is the sort of damage that you can do, the sort of content that you can relatively easily do on this sort of insanely cheap budget, especially due to the fact that we cut out the cluster. We're not using Ricelotha in the showcase. Actually, we weren't even using a belt, period. So yeah, let's head into the POB portion of the video, as there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this build. Breakpoints are important, a lot of other things as well. So what you'll see in the description is multiple different POBs at different price points, and if you are going to be following this build, I highly recommend you follow the POB 1-to-1. Don't stray away from it. I've spent a lot of time perfecting this build and these POBs, so highly recommend you don't go off on your own. because there's a chance you brick the build. Okay, looking at the League Start POB, it is a level 90 POB. It, of course, is going to have the leveling trees, and this is what I wanted to show real quick. So we are going to be leveling with Spectral Helix. The notes and the way of doing this is all there, so you don't have to worry about that. You can just follow along, and you're going to have an extremely smooth leveling. But what I wanted to showcase is essentially how much regrets we're going to need from the leveling tree to the endgame tree. So far, we're going to need to regret this and this. We're going to need to regret this. We are going to need to regret this and that's it, right? That is pretty much it. Everything else is going to be on the endgame POB, meaning you're not going to need a single regret. I did the math on it, and it's 19 regrets that you'll need, but you do get 20 from the quests, meaning you don't have to spend a single chaos when it comes to respecking this build into the endgame version, which is going to be, of course, General's Cry. So yeah, I also cut out the large cluster jewel in order to get, in order to cut out the price. Now I'm using a single medium cluster of Led by Example and Haunting Shout. Now here's the cool thing about these clusters. They are extremely cheap. Now exerted attacks clusters are pretty much 2 chaos or so, even at item level 50, which I believe is what is required for Haunting Shout and Led by Example. But what I would do is I would basically buy the base for like 2 chaos and then throw them into any sort of reforge in Harvest that you find. It could be cold, life, defense, whatever it is, because at the end of the day, these are extremely high weighted modifiers, Led by Example and Haunting Shout. So it's really pretty easy to get this cluster. It's also not mandatory, but you do get about 10% more damage from nearby enemies are intimidated. And Led by Example gives you free onslaught, which is very important because of the attack speed thresholds that I was talking about. Okay, now that you've seen the tree, the leveling notes, and the leveling trees, let's talk about the skill gems real quick. So these are not really interchangeable. There's not much things that you could change. Now, there are some people and some POBs that you might find which are going to have Conk Effect instead of Pulverize. Now, these are pretty similar in terms of what they give you damage-wise, but actually Conk Effect is a little bit better. But the thing is, AoE is pretty mandatory for this skill. Now, the reason why Conk Effect looks so much better than Pulverize is because of attack speed. But one thing you need to know about this build is attack speed doesn't scale linearly. Once you get to 10 attacks per second, so once your attack rate reaches 10, the scaling stops. Because remember, the Mirage Warrior lasts for 0.6 seconds, and after that, they dissipate. Meaning, if you have too much attack speed, and the Mirage Warrior is able to do its attack, it is not going to even wait for the full cooldown to go away. As soon as it's done channeling its attack, it's gone. Meaning, anything past the 10 attack rate is basically completely wasted damage. So if you look at Pulverize, it is actually taking my attack rate from 12 to 10.3, which means essentially it has no damage penalty whatsoever, and the less attack speed doesn't matter whatsoever, as anything past 10 is wasted anyways. Now, Conk Effect, on the other hand, is going to have no effect on our attack rate, and it's going to basically only affect our actual damage, but you do need to remove 20% from the total. So in reality, Conk Effect is not 44% more damage, it's only about 24% more damage. Meanwhile, Pulverize is 32.8% more damage. So this is just something I figured I'd explain because the attack rate threshold is extremely important. Not only do you not want to go too much over it, but you also want to make sure that you're at it or higher, slightly higher. You don't want to go under it because it is required to release at 6 stages. Anything below 10 attack rate is not going to release at 6 stages. So attack speed is extremely important on this build. The auras that we're going to run are Precision, Pride, Dread Banner, Blood and Sand, and also Determination, which allowed us to get quite tanky. Once you have a little bit of armor on your gear, flasks up, endurance charges, you're going to be rocking about 40,000 armor, which is honestly not that bad paired with Molten Shell, of course. Otherwise, we are rocking Assassin's Mark as we need to self-cast it, Protector, and War Chief. Now, because we don't have multiple totems, we do have to use Val Ancestral War Chief, which is why this damage might seem absolutely insane on such a budget, but that is because of Val Ancestral War Chief. If you turn this off, it's only 6.6 million. If you turn off Protector, it's only 5 million. So it's very important you use your totems when it comes to single target. Not only that, without Ancestral Protector, you are no longer at the 10 attack rate. Therefore, even if this says that you're at 5 million, this is because of the 6 stages. You are no longer going to be at 6 stages, meaning when your totems are not down, instead of doing something like 10.6 million damage, which is an actual accurate representation of the damage in a perfect situation, you are only going to be dealing probably about 2 to 3 million while you're actually clearing the map. So it is more than necessary that you put your totems down for single target. Cyclone, Cast when channeling, Desecrate, and Infuse channeling for a little bit more damage. It's really nothing to write home about, but why not? Flame Dash is interchangeable with any other movement skill, so it's whatever you want. I typically use Flame Dash because it allows me to bypass requirements for things like Maven and for things like Cyrus, the beams and whatnot, because Flame Dash is considered a blink. If you use something like Leap Slam, which yes is a lot more efficient and is a lot faster, it is not considered a blink, it's just a dash, which means if you were to Leap Slam through a Cyrus beam, you will get hit by it. Same thing for a Maven beam, and that will, you know, prevent all further regen, so it's pretty bad. So I typically use Flame Dash, but when I'm not doing super endgame bossing, I'll just use Leap Slam. Berserk, as always, is going to be super mandatory. It's great defensive, great offensive. Typically, when it comes to super endgame encounters like the Feared, you are basically going to be playing around Berserk. If Berserk is not up, you're running away. If Berserk is up, you're pretty much able to face tank a lot of things. Because the flat DR is really good. It also has more attack speed, which is a multiplier, right? So whenever Berserk is not up, your attack speed is also going below the threshold, which is why I'm saying that this DPS is definitely hard to calculate. What I showcased earlier when I was doing those bosses should be, in a perfect world, 10.6 million DPS. But you can't spin directly on top of the boss at all time. You are also not at the config amount of rage, so 40 rage at all times. Sometimes you'll dip below that, all the way down to 25. Sometimes Berserk is not up. Sometimes you forget to use Blood Rage. Sometimes your totems die. There are so many moving parts to this build, but when the stars align, you are absolutely decimating things. Now, I'm saying that, but this is only applying to the budget version. As soon as you have Paradoxica, all of that goes away because you'll just one-shot literally everything no matter what. In terms of the items, I've already went over them in the actual showcase, except the Raislotha. This is pretty much our best in slot as it gives us a ton of damage. You take this off, you lose about 20% of your damage, and this can be further increased via better rolls, and of course Catalyst to attack will also make that even a bigger difference. But that's pretty much it for the actual budget POB. Now, my estimation of the actual damage on this sort of POB with Ichimonji and with this sort of budget, we're talking that, in my opinion, probably somewhere around 4 to 5 million DPS, as long as you are not playing it completely Pepega, as long as you're actually minding and making sure that you're putting down your Protector, your Warcry, you're making sure that you have Blood Rage for the attack speed, you're making sure that your Assassin's Mark is on, your sustained DPS over a long period of time is probably something like 4 to 5 million, which is very, very respectable, considering that you will have big updrafts in damage. Whenever all the stars align, you'll have about 10 to 20 seconds of like absolutely blasting a boss before it goes back down to the sustained DPS of maybe 4 to 5 million, which is still, again, on this sort of budget, on these sort of items, more than enough, more than the vast majority of builds are going to be able to offer. Okay, now let's talk real quickly about what else you'll find in the description, and there are other POBs. So you'll find 3 more POBs. The first one is a 20 to 25x version. Now, this one does not cap the attack rate required, which is why the DPS is fake. You'll probably be, unlike which this says you'll be at around 17 million, it's probably more around the 12 to 13 million. However, it has a Paradoxica, so it doesn't matter. Everything is just going to melt. The damage is more than sufficient. We are going Brass Dome on the little bit higher budget because this allows us to get immunity to critical strikes and also makes our all resistance upwards of 81 to 82% for fire, which is going to greatly increase our survivability. However, I believe we have to drop determination in order to make this happen, which is a bit of a shame. The next POB is a 40 to 50x version. Now, this is where the damage starts to really, really ramp up. And when I say ramp up, I'm talking a few seconds and every single monster in the field would be dead. Maven would die within a few seconds. Like, this is some pretty heavy hitting damage because we do reach the attack rate that we need. And that is basically all we need to just melt the entirety of the game. And at that point, we're starting to go back into investing into tankiness. Our armor is going to go up, our physical damage reduction, our all res, our block chance, all of that is definitely going to go up once you start getting into this level of investment. And then the 100x POB is one of my go-to. It has ailment immunity via implicits on the rings, something that I found out about last league alongside on the body armor and on the tree. So this is a simulacrum farming essentially version of General Cry Blade Flurry Berserker. This is kind of what you want to look like in terms of damage, in terms of defense, but this is sitting at a comfortable 40+ million DPS with the attack rate just about where you want it to be, alongside, of course, the critical strike chance. Okay, now there's one thing I realized that I completely forgot to talk about, and that is the Ascendancy. So the Ascendancy is all available in the notes portion of the POB, but essentially we're going with Warbringer first in order to even get Rage while leveling. It's going to make our leveling that much faster, followed by Crave the Slaughter for more Rage, and Rite of Ruin to triple the effect of Rage, so it makes us, faster and also deal more damage and also attack quicker. And then we finish off with Aspect of Carnage for just big damn. Next, however, you'll see that the next POB is actually going with Blitz Charges. And the reason for that is because we no longer have attack speed on our weapon, and Paradoxica is very slow, 1.3 attacks per second. And we want to get as close as possible to the 10 attacks per second, and we want to exceed it, but we are nowhere near there. Blitz Charges are a great way to get a lot of attack speed. As you can see, 6.3 to 9.14. Until we get attack speed on our Paradoxica, which is going to happen around the 40 to 50x budget. At that point, we are actually, we are actually going to go Blitz Charges still, but at this point, we are going to reach the 10 attacks cap, and I think the last POB is going to reach the cap without the Blitz Charges, and that is because we are going to invest a lot more into attack speed with things like Tailwind, for example, with things like Elevated Onslaught Armored Boots. Things like that are going to allow us to very easily reach the 10 attacks per second without needing to go Blitz Charges, because the problem with Blitz Charges is that you need to proc them. Your Mirage Warriors cannot. So what this means is that you need to be sitting directly on top of the boss to actually be able to get them. And of course, you need to attack, 20 times or in crits 20 times as well in order to get all those Blitz Charges. And not only that, your Blitz Charges are nuking your crit. As you can see, Blitz Charges on this Ascendancy would reduce my critical strike chance by 20%. That's a pretty big deal, and one that I would not recommend, which is why Blitz Charges are a great crutch in order to get to the required attack rate. But once you're there, Blitz Charges are bait, and you definitely want to go with Rite of Ruin. It's going to make you much faster, make your clear faster, and whatnot. It will, however, drain your life, and paired with Blood Rage, that's a little bit annoying. But with how much damage you're dealing with the leech that you have available on the build, that is just not a problem as long as you're hitting something. Anyways, that's pretty much my entire guide when it comes to General Cry. I think that it's definitely one of the better starters available. I've spent a lot of time refining these POBs, and I'm extremely happy with where I've ended, especially the super budget one. The fact that we were able to drop the large cluster and make the build that much cheaper is definitely something that I'm really, really happy about. And the leveling portion, no longer requiring any regrets whatsoever, is also something that I think is going to be a nice quality of life change for anybody looking to play this as their league starter. So that's pretty much going to be it for my updated build guide. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Before I go, as always, I want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So Lycum, Hamad, Max, Georgie, Rascal, Stan, Brandon, welcome back, Thomas, Nate, The Great Master, Alex, The Other Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Scott, Nailed, Kevin, Killer Kev, Dubstep, Alex, Bitizen, Inks, and Jarek. If you have any question in regard to this build or anything else, feel free to ask them in the description. As like I said, this build is definitely one which is not super friendly to new players. There's a lot of moving parts, But when you get it right, it is definitely one of those builds which is extremely rewarding to play. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.